Subplots class with ScriptCamp. This is a free class that's going to examine these little stories that kind of branch off from your main narrative and whoop, I almost knocked over a glass bottle. That would be a subplot in my class, wouldn't it? These are the stories that branch off of the main story and connect back to it and intersect with it in interesting ways that ultimately go on to do things like reinforce the themes of your overall piece and highlight your character change and use this idea of contrast to really bring out certain aspects of your characters that you're going to develop over the course of your project. Subplots are really good for developing your characters and sometimes using them as a barometer for that character's ultimate change in the A story. So let's get going. ScriptCamp is the company here that we are a non-profit community with many different servers like ScriptCamp that you're on, or like ScriptCamp that you're on right now. We are free and low-cost classes to help you reach your life goals. We have weekly classes in ScriptCamp in which we have things like our boot camps where we go from idea to finished draft of a new pilot or movie. We have WordCamp where we'll go all the way from blank page to complete book in just 12 weeks. So we have these classes and events. A lot of them are free, and we also have some for our paid subscribers, such as our boot camps and Writer's Lab. Many different servers to join with many different skills that we teach, many different classes, a lot of them for free currently. So definitely check out things like ToonCamp for weekly animation classes. CodeCamp will have new coding and programming classes soon. So this is not just a screenwriting server, but also a community of many different learners, many different instructors, all across Discord. Here's a little tiny bit about me. I've been writing full-length scripts for 11 years. Have been a repped and working writer in Hollywood since 2017 when I got signed for the first time, and have written for Shudder's Creepshow back in 2019. Oof, that was 4 years ago now, wasn't it? So I teach the boot camps and the weekly Writer's Lab. I have a thriller script set up in Hollywood, and my specialty is going to be in horror, thriller, and action for the most part. Here's our free classes we have coming up. We have the new session of our bootcamp intro that's going to be on the 17th at 6 p.m. That's coming up in 2 days. That'll be an overview of the entire feature writing course that lasts 8 weeks. We have a best protagonist for your story class on Wednesday the 22nd at 6 o'clock. All these times, by the way, are in Pacific time. We are based in Los Angeles. We have that new session of our pilot writing course that starts Sunday, March 5th at 11 a.m., and that'll be running Sundays from 11 to 1 for 6 weeks. Everything in teal over here on the right is going to be for WordCamp. That's our novel-focused server, and we have a bunch of classes coming up there soon, too. On Saturday from 12 to 2, we have a brand new class in writing action and adventure novels. This is everything from your Solomon Kane to your Indiana Jones and Doc Savage to Lord of the Rings, fantasy adventure, pulp adventure, action adventure. We are looking at outlining on the 22nd at 6, and we have a query letter class on that Thursday at 6 where we're going to look at queries, but not just how to write it to market your book and get your book repped or get you repped as an author, but also looking at queries as a kind of organizational tool to look at that high-level overview of your story and to start kind of figuring out what is important in your story before you even write the book in the first place. That new session of our novel bootcamp starts February 25th at noon to 2 in WordCamp. So here's everything coming up. We have I'm not going to go over the whole things, but I just wanted to show you for a second if you wanted to see an overview of that feature writing course that we have coming up in the TV course. So what I really want to show you here is that the first half of these courses is all about organizing your story. So we don't write a single word or a single page of the actual script until we know what happens on every page beforehand. We are using this method of my very organized architect method of planning, where we try to figure out every single scene before we get going. Here's an overview of the pilot course, which is just 6 weeks. So first 3 weeks is all about working up to those scene cards, which is going to be a scene for every single, or a card for every single scene in your entire script. That second half of class, you're going to write the first act in week 4, second act in week 5, third act week 6, with that final draft finished by April 23rd for TV. Here's everything we have coming up, and this is getting to be so big that it barely even fits on one title card anymore. But by now we have easily over 100 hours of events and classes per month. The boot camps are going to be our kind of bread and butter, so if you're looking for where to start and just want to kind of learn to write movies and TV, try out those new sessions of TV and feature boot camp on March 5th or Friday the 17th. Or if you're more into books, novel writing boot camp on the 25th. And then on the right, you can see everything else we have going on in ScriptCamp, many different clubs. opportunities for feedback and for peer review, such as 2 different script swaps per week. We have a disability workshop, which just got added, queer writers group, women writers group. We have clubs for different genres, horror Tuesdays at 6, fantasy Sundays at 5. We have animation workshop Mondays at 6, and plenty of other stuff that you can see up here. So whatever you're into, you can either join a group for it or you can start a group of your own. Definitely post in our chat channels if you have questions about any of these things, or send me or Nacho, our co-founder, a message if you would like more info on any of this. But these are all, everything you see here on the right is open to everyone. Everything on the left, the boot camps here on the left are going to be for our paid subscribers, but those first classes, those intro and overview classes, will always be free and public. All right, lots of things going on, lots of things to do at ScriptCamp. You can donate, become a supporting member, get access to all boot camps and labs from just $29 a month. If you use that yearly discount, you're saving 40% if you buy yearly. You can volunteer if you know a language or skill. We're trying to add language teachers and trying to get Lingo Camp up and going, which we just have not added almost anything on there yet. A lot of these communities are still growing, so we'd love to have more volunteer teachers who could send either me or Nacho a message and get you started. You can tell your friends, too. If you're a member and you refer somebody and you both get a free month, and they continue past their free trial, you will both get a free month of Unlimited and a free month of Arc Studio Pro, which is a great screenwriting software with really good organizational tools for things like subplots. Okay, so that's all of our setup for today. Let's look at our class. So we're going to start with just definition, talking about subplots a little bit more broadly, and we'll have just a minute for us to say, what's your favorite subplot from a movie or show, and tell us why, or a book or a play or anything. Just what is your favorite and why? We'll look at some examples and basics, and I won't go way too into Lord of the Rings, because when I start talking about Lord of the Rings, it ends up becoming a Lord of the Rings class, which we don't necessarily want to do. But it does have a ton of subplots, as we know about. And there are a lot of just really, really, really clear ones that have such an important purpose in the overall narrative. And they're just very memorable. So I think that it's good to look at, for examples, because we just remember what all these different characters went through. I think a lot of people obviously saw these movies or read the books. So we'll look a little bit at Lord of the Rings at the beginning. We'll look at B-story as barometer of character growth, and we'll kind of touch on this technique which was used so often in 80s and 90s screenwriting, wherein the romance subplot of the B-story is actually going to be tracking the main character's progress in dealing with something that they need to overcome in order to succeed in the A story. It's not that you have to use that sort of model of subplotting, but you should see why it's there and see how it works, at least, so you understand like the kind of rationale behind it, and can use that same sort of technique in something else, even if it's not just the, in order to save the world, you have to get the girl first kind of thing, which is like the cliche, crappy version of it. But we will look at just how the machinery of that is functioning, and how those subplots are actually showing us where your main character is in their overall development. Oh, somebody talking? Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi. Do you have a question?
How's your afternoon going?
Going great. We're doing a class now, actually. So make sure.
I'm sorry for interrupting. I'm sorry. I'll mute.
You're good. Yeah, just keep it on mute until we have a time for questions. We'll let you know.
All right, will do.
Thank you. We'll look
One more question.
Go ahead.
How are you doing today?
Doing great, thanks. Let's keep on going. So we'll look at B-story for barometer of character growth. We will look at different techniques and just tactics for subplot writing. And then our two sort of analysis sections for today, we are going to be looking at both a TV episode. We're going to look at episode 6 of Squid Game, which is called Gunbu, which will feature really heavy spoilers for that show. So if you don't want to have that show spoiled from a few years ago, definitely you can tune out for that part of class if you want. We'll look at a feature as well. We're going to look at the plot breakdown of Galaxy Quest from 1999, one of my favorite movies from when I was a kid, like a family favorite movie that I recently revisited less than a week ago, and just realized how incredibly well written it is and how well realized all of the different subplots are, and how well they all sort of contribute to the main sort of themes and crux of the story, and the way that they all just kind of tie together is just masterful. So we'll look at Squid Game and Galaxy Quest as our breakdowns and analysis for today. Okay. So, and at the end, we'll have just a few slides to wrap up and give kind of overall tips and my personal techniques, which may not work for everybody, but as somebody who has branched out recently into writing more ensemble stories, I've had to kind of develop little tools in order to keep on track and not get too far away from the spine or the A story of the narrative. Okay, so let's get going because we've got plenty to do. Our first question is just going to sort of be, what are some of your favorite subplots in movies or TV? I think that, oh, we have a troll in the chat. That's fun. Banned. Ooh, it feels good. Feels good to hit him with the ban hammer.
Who was trolling?
I'm not sure.
Was it R Stuffs?
I forget what his name already even was. I just banned him, but that's okay. So let's just ask the question, what are some of our favorite subplots? Behind me, we've got a couple examples. I mean, I think we all remember Timon and Pumbaa, which is a subplot. They're not part of the kind of crux of the A story, but they do really contribute to Simba's development. We have the cop storyline from Superbad, which I think works super well, and is just a blast and kind of shows that your subplot, if it's just fun, then it kind of earns you a lot of leeway. We got a couple other on here as well, but what about you guys? What are some of your favorite subplots from movies or shows, and why? What do you like about them?
I really like the subplot in the movie Star Wars The Force Awakens, personally.
Okay. Which one?
Star Wars The Force Awakens.
No, sorry, which subplot?
Oh, the one where the what's his name? Kylo Ren.
Mm-hmm.
He like kills like the whole village.
Is that that's the opening scene, isn't it? Or like one of the opening scenes?
No, that's like towards the end, I think.
Towards the end? I'm thinking of the scene where Kylo Ren he stops a laser bolt in midair, and this is the scene where Finn ends up with the blood streaked across his face, and he ends up sort of becoming disillusioned with the stormtroopers. I think that's actually towards the beginning. But Kylo Ren as a subplot character is a great example.
Shut the fuck up, you fat shit. All right, shut the fuck up, you fat shit.
We're getting
fucking
more trolls
loser.
than ever. That's so lame. Bye. I think this is what we get when we publicly announce the classes. It was such a good comment too. I was so ready to talk about Kylo Ren.
No, he messed it all up.
Okay. Does somebody else have a subplot from a movie or show they'd like to actually?
I do.
Go ahead.
I put it in the chat, but in Finding Nemo, you have the fish tank.
Yeah,
I
great
think
example.
That works well because it is also the main story is obviously Marlin trying to get his son, but you have Nemo and like his personal development and like how he's changing as well, and like all the funny the characters in the fish tank I think are one of my favorite set of characters in that movie, of course.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great example, in my opinion.
Especially because that movie is so much about the freedom versus captivity, right? And so Nemo starts in the open ocean, and he feels like he should have all the opportunities available to him, but his dad keeps him so close to the chest that he has no freedom for himself. And then when he transitions into a situation where he's put in a group with a bunch of characters who are in fact literally trapped in a fishbowl, and we see the kind of ways that has affected them. Like they worship the little bubble vent or whatever. They have like developed...
it's the Ring of Fire. They go through it, I think.
Yeah, they've developed sort of like rituals and eccentricities that directly pertain to the fact that they are stuck in a little box. We sort of see the opposite of Nemo's beginning perspective, and we use that contrast to highlight how important freedom is. So great example. Anyone else? Or do you just unmute and call me names
Woman
again?
King.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can anybody hear me?
I hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, great. Hi, yeah, my name is Tamara. I went to see The Woman King, and I thought the subplot of Viola Davis's, I don't remember her name or her daughter's name, but she discovers her long-lost daughter by a mark that was put on her daughter's shoulder when they took her daughter away from her, I guess, when the tribes were warring. And I thought it was good because Viola Davis plays this real strong warrior woman, and she's tough on this young lady, and because she's training all of these female, I don't know, soldiers, I guess you would call them, and she doesn't know the girl is her daughter initially, but you see them have this real tenuous relationship, and then later she finds out that it's her daughter, and when she thinks that she's been, well, I don't want to give it all away, but it was really well written, and it didn't. What I liked about it was because it didn't get in the way of the actual story of them having to fight to save their tribe, their land, but it showed you another side of Viola Davis because she's just tough and she's got to persevere. But then when she realizes that her daughter's alive and that the young lady that she's really been hard on is her daughter, it just, you get to see her have just a transition. She's still tough and everything, but you get to see the softness of her, which we didn't get to see a lot of because she's, they're in survival mode. So
Right.
I thought it was really well done, very well done, and it's an ensemble cast. There's so many characters and so many things they're all going through, but they had enough time to make that shine. So yeah, that's the only thing I can think of right off the top of my head.
Thanks, Tamara. Yeah, I haven't seen that movie, but I think the sort of, you've touched on something really important that subplots do, is they show us another side of the main character. So having a character that is a tough, stoic warrior badass all day, and then they go home and they're super sweet with their wife or something, or like they're forced to sort of, raise their kids, or we see them at home as opposed to just when they are, quote, at work, then it helps you build out and make that character feel more fleshed out, because no one in real life is all one thing. We all have
Right.
different sides to us, and the best way to bring that out in drama is by putting them with another person that highlights that contrast. So that's what
Yes.
subplots are so good at, is about contrast, and that's mostly what the theme of our class will be today. Thank you for the
Great.
comments.
Thank you.
We have a couple comments in the chat as well. Jotul says the subplot of the wealthy family's perspective in Parasite is great, thematically essential to having a balanced overview to allow you to empathize with both families. Yeah, that's another great thing that subplots can be used for, is to build that empathy with characters that otherwise we would not understand where they were coming from. Especially villain subplots. Villain subplots are so good. I love when there's a subplot that just follows the villain doing something. Like, a recent amazing example is Silco from Arcane, who I loved all the scenes with just him, or the ones that show why he is how he is, or that show that other side of him being nurturing or caring, and we sort of see why he is so evil, or why he feels the need to be so evil to accomplish his goals, is because he cares about other things so very much. So I think that's a great example that you can use subplots to make us actually see these dimensions of other characters that make the entire story feel richer. Other comments in the chat, I won't read the whole things, but Stir says, Jesse in Toy Story 2. We have Inigo Montoya, his quest in The Princess Bride, which is also super great. The Ghostbusters 2, I don't remember Ghostbusters 2, but Rick Moranis subplot character. Jack and the Incredibles. Jenny's life in Forrest Gump. Thank you for all the examples, guys. These are all great things to look at. And I think that a lot of these best ones are going to sort of be doing the same types of things, which is what we wanted to really focus on in this class. That and calling me names on the mic, I guess. That's the other thing we're going to focus on. Okay, so let's look at our first couple slides here. We'll start with this Lord of the Rings thing. And also I included Amelie on here, and I was like, wait, what was the A story in Amelie? Isn't Amelie just subplots? But then I remembered, no, it's just, it kind of has this odd structure where a subplot kind of elevates to become the A story as it goes on. And I'm talking, of course, about the man in the photo booth subplot in Amelie. But in some stories we can almost look at as truly ensemble stories are basically just a bunch of different subplots. And there's different ways of doing this and different ways of tying everything together. An ensemble means there's a lot of characters that have equal weight, or usually ensemble style storytelling is sort of saying that although there may be still that A story, and that's going to carry us through, there are going to be a bunch of other stories in here that are just as important. A recent example I saw was the Coen brothers movie Hail Caesar, which follows this character Eddie Mannix as its main lead, but there's 6 different other little stories going on that each feel kind of equally important and get just as much screen time. So let's look at Lord of the Rings really quick, because I think that this is one that a lot of people are familiar with, and it's just going to give us a good example of the kind of like 3-beat trajectory for a subplot. So let's start with these two guys on the right. Who knows this story pretty well and can tell us who the elf and the dwarf are?
It's Legolas and Gimli.
Legolas and Gimli, thank you. Okay, so Legolas and Gimli are from two different races that are clashing with each other and hate each other, right? The dwarves and the elves, they never get along. And at the Council of Elrond, in the midpoint of the first movie, what does Gimli even say? I would rather die than see the ring in the hands of an elf. And if we use our sort of normal relationship trajectory that we've talked about in classes before, the way that a kind of relationship quote goes in a story is the characters start out hating each other. They're forced, and you'll see this in everything from buddy crime stories to rom-coms. We start out hating each other or bouncing right off each other. Then we're forced to work together or forced to be together for some reason. And then, although you keep needling and poking at each other in ways that, continue to upset each other, and we get lots of fun antics based on that, eventually we come to see what the value is that the other person contributes to the partnership that you yourself cannot contribute. And through that, you actually become friends or lovers, depending on what kind of arc it is, until we hit their all is lost pit of despair moment where there's usually a big breakup. I don't think there's a big breakup between Legolas and Gimli in this story, so we might be missing that beat of it. But in any case, by the end, they come back together. We sort of realize that value that the other one adds that we haven't had up until now. Ultimately, this should sort of go on to support the major themes of this piece, which it does. And then by the end, they have resolved to be friends or lovers, right? So, Air Nomadic asks, who's my favorite character? It's Pippin. I'm glad you asked. Because Merry and Pippin are basically in a stoner comedy that just happens to, intersect with the main story until they become heroes by the end. But
the end subplot, that's another good one.
Yeah, the Ents, the Treebeard, his subplot, and that ties directly into Merry and Pippin for sure. And it actually also the Ent subplot marks the point where it goes from being stoner adventure to because here's what I'm gonna go into about that. The fact that Merry and Pippin need to get the Ents involved in the war and convince the Ents why they need to be in the war is also the moment where they realize why they need to be involved in the war. And that's what's so brilliant about it. The fact is that they're the Ents are no, we're not going to take any part of it. And Merry steps forward and is but you're part of this world. That is the point where they transition from being two dumb stoner buddies who went on this trip because they just kind of happened to be in the right place at the right time. And they committed to it because they like Frodo and Sam. And that's really it. To the point where they're now going to be riding in cavalry charges and, saving Denethor or not saving Denethor, but Pippin's whole subplot with Denethor, and just they realize in order to make the Ents part of the world, I have to convince them that the world matters and that they need to contribute to it and help save it, and they need to do the same thing. So that's a great subplot. And then I think I was talking Legolas and Gimli still. I think if we just look at the really simple ABC, we start at I would die before I see the rings in the hands of an elf. We go to they're clashing off each other and they're their banter and lots of friendly rivalry. But and what is the friendly rivalry? They're counting how many orcs they kill per battle, whatever it is. We see all the fun from that. But they're coming to appreciate what the other one contributes to the team. And by the end, how does the line go? I never thought I would die fighting side by side with an elf. And what does Legolas say?
Something about friend, with a friend.
How about fighting with a friend?
How about side by side with a friend? Yes, exactly. So, 3 clear. I guess there wasn't a clear moment in the middle, but if we look at the sort of the orc murder contest as their sort of middle beat, where they're okay, they're working together, they're synergizing now, they're working really well. They've gone from abject hatred of each other because they haven't come to appreciate what the other one offers yet. They come to realize what each one contributes to the team, and by the end, they are best friends to the extent that in the expanded mythologies and stuff, they are friends forever. So that's just one example of many, and that goes on to, I think what I want to bring out from this one is the fact that it affects the principal character's development, in that it shows that they are both becoming open to the idea that maybe people from different species, different races, or different agendas might be able to, in fact, work with me instead of just pursuing these selfish goals. It showcases and utilizes the clear contrast between the characters. I mean, I think visually there is clear contrast between them as we can possibly be, right? Gimli is a little squat dwarf man. Legolas is a tall, elegant elf man who walks across the top of the snow because he's so light he doesn't even sink down into it. Gimli fights with an axe. Legolas fights with a bow. Gimli drinks hard mugs of ale, where Legolas takes a tiny sip of ambrosia and is like, I feel a tingle in my fingers. So we have this very clear visual contrast with them, and it's just a fun subplot. And the fun is gonna almost always, like I said, gonna earn you a lot of room to do whatever you want. And last, though, it connects to and supports the main themes of the story, which is different races and different species putting aside their differences, which is like this is what the entire series is about, and coming together for this common good against this greater enemy. And their relationship actually is the small version of that theme, just illustrated with those simple beats. Does anyone have any questions or comments on just this Legolas and Gimli thing and how we can almost use that as a model for how subplots work? How about Frodo and Gollum? I need to put like a Discord tag for just Lord of the Rings fans, I feel, so I can just call on people and be like, you, tell me about Frodo and Gollum. But maybe I'll just, since we have so much to cover, I'll just go quickly into it. But so Frodo, we remember, Frodo is carrying the ring. He's becoming slowly corrupted by it. And Gollum shows what's going to happen if it gets too far. So Gollum represents this version of Frodo that he is in danger of becoming. He actually is a physical reminder, or like a tangible reminder in the world of the cost and the stakes of this journey. It's saying, if you don't succeed, you'll turn into that dude. And if you don't succeed fast enough, you'll turn into this greedy little monster man. That kind of represents all the worst of the impulses that people have in relation to the ring, which, in relation to just the concept of power. To Gollum, he fell victim to these vices, and he's addicted to the power. He acts like a meth head, basically, trying to get his next fix, and he's willing to slaughter anyone who gets in his way. He'll trick anyone, he'll lie to anyone, and Frodo is worried about becoming that. But he can't get rid of Gollum, because A, he needs them to take them to Mordor, and B, if Frodo gives up on Gollum, it's like him admitting that he will never be able to be saved either. So it's the perfect balance. Like, we have the Sam Frodo Gollum dynamic is like one of the best in all of storytelling, because and Frodo is really the A story character. So like we have to only we're going to look at this a little differently than we would a tertiary subplot, for instance. But then the fact is that here's and Roman's mentioned in the chat, the fact that Gollum is Frodo's worst nightmare and Sam is like the pure side of a hobbit, and the fact that Gollum is like the most evil, darkest version of what a hobbit can be, it makes Sam's sacrifices seem all the deeper, and it makes Sam's commitment and goodness all the clearer. That's what we're talking about in terms of contrast. By putting two characters together where we want to emphasize a trait in one of them, one of the best ways to do that is by taking that same trait and amping it up to the opposite of it, up to like 100 in the next person. Or in the person that they're partnered with. So if you have a character and we want to say your main character is lazy, then we make their roommate, like in Shaun of the Dead, we make their roommate a neat freak who's like has a really steady job and is always getting on their case about why don't you get off the couch now and again. So having a character to show in comparison to any other one through a subplot is a great way to bring out those traits and to really clarify those characters' journeys. Aeronomadic asks, does it always have to be the complete opposite? No, it doesn't always have to be the complete opposite. But, and I think maybe think in terms of like, it's not the character doesn't have to be the opposite of someone else, but think of their traits, right? Somebody else has an opposite trait to that character that highlights that trait more clearly in the first one. Okay, so again, I can go on for about Lord of the Rings for a million hours, but I just wanted to start with this because I think we know these characters, and going from I would die before I saw the ring in the hands of an elf to how about fighting side by side with a friend is just one of those crystal clear progressions that kind of just makes those really clear waypoints or markers in the development of the subplot. And in terms of movies and TV, it's really helpful to have very clear moments like that that show that something has changed here. So if you have characters that are becoming friends after a while, it might not be enough to just say, I don't know, it sort of seems like they act like they like each other a little more. Whereas in a movie or TV show, if you have something like the main first character, he's always eating sandwiches and he never shares any of his sandwiches with anyone. And then at the midpoint, he shares a crust of his sandwich with the other character. And then at the end, he shares a whole sandwich with them. It's the dumbest example ever, but I hope you guys see what I mean, that those markers of progress, visual markers of progress, are key to making subplots work in movies and TV, as opposed to in books. Our YouTube comment, Reverb, says, nobody does it as well as Tolkien. Yeah, Tolkien has the benefit of having spent like 15 years or whatever putting his world together and building out all these rich characters. I think Peter Jackson did a fantastic job of just bringing kind of the most important stuff to the forefront, but yeah, you're right. I mean, he's a master. So let's look at just some broader info about subplots. So what is a subplot? It's a story that runs parallel to the main plot, or the A story. The A story usually being in a movie, we can usually break the A story down to well, first of all, let's always think of subplots in terms of characters. So your A story is going to involve your lead, the villain, and sometimes a central relationship. And everything beyond that has to either, if it's not contributing or tying into that A story, then it might be a subplot, in which case we can use it to infuse important information into that main storyline. These subplots are going to create richer and more complex narrative arcs. A subplot might play out entirely in just one chapter or episode or section of the story, or it might pervade the entire narrative. We might have a subplot that's just a couple little scenes, though usually we're talking about stuff that's gonna, it's usually gonna be more than one single scene, but in theory, a single scene could perhaps be a subplot, but usually we're going to weave these all throughout the main story. Any questions on just the basics of what a subplot is?
Yeah, I have a bit of a dumb question.
Okay.
I guess I don't know how to explain this. It sounds so ridiculous, but like, to what degree can a subplot be within the main plot? Like, I guess the reason I ask that, it's like, to me, Frodo and Gollum technically being it's more of the main plot as opposed to a subplot. But I'm thinking, like, if there wasn't any other subplots within that movie, let's say there was like two simultaneous, like a romance. I'm just trying to think of, like, let's say like a character is trying to achieve a goal. That's like the main action of the story that we're watching. But simultaneous to that, we're also seeing them do things in relation to like a romance in some sense. It's like, it's still the same plot technically speaking if it's like in the exact same scenes. Like, we're not cutting back and forth from two places, but it's happening simultaneous together. Would you still refer to that as a subplot, or is that just like a different vocabulary? I don't know how to explain that.
I think I understand. So I'm not sure what the answer is, but the point, I guess, would be that, so within the A story, how many, like, I guess,
strands?
How many strands are going to be within the A story? Is that, I guess, that's sort of what you're asking? There's not one
answer.
Good.
I guess it wasn't necessarily how many can you get away with, but rather like, is that something would you refer to a subplot, or is it more in the actual action of like cutting to and from different like actual scenes in some place, like that aren't in relation to another?
Well, so usually it is going to involve cutting around to different people in different places and points in time, rather than different like characters that come in and bounce off of the A story. So we might look at the A story of Lord of the Rings being Frodo's trying to destroy the ring, and Gollum is essentially the villain of the story, considering that Sauron is not characterized at all, right? So the A story is essentially Frodo, and I know Gollum is not exactly directly opposing Frodo, so it's a little bit different, but he basically acts as the force of opposition, that he represents the corruption of the ring, right? So we could say, yeah, you could easily just look at it and say that relationship, strand or thread or whatever we want to call it, is just part of the A story, as is Frodo's relationship to Gandalf or Aragorn or these other people that he sort of like, play into his tale. I don't think there's a number that is going to always work with these. In movies, I'm going to say less is more, and having like 3 or 4 key relationships that really work with your A story character and move them along further are going to be better than having 10 okay or not that impactful relationships with them. So I'm going to say try to focus it to the people that really matter as much as you can. And within the A story, I think you do have a lot of room to your main character will bounce off of many other characters, ones that might take precedence in their own subplots at the same time, but might just sort of be obstacles in your A story or something like that. I may have gotten off track with this answer, but it is an interesting point.
No, you're fine. Yeah, like I said, it was a bit of a dumb question. I guess it was just almost like if you removed all of the subplots, technically speaking, and you just focused on Frodo's perspective, is there technically still subplots happening within that because he's doing a multitude of different things, or is it just you wouldn't refer to it as such, but something else?
If we limited the scope of the entire movie to just Frodo's journey, then the subplots I would then say that his A story is overcoming the many obstacles that will take him to Mordor, and Gollum is just one of those obstacles at that point. And so his relationship with Gollum, the dynamic between him, Gollum, and Sam would in fact be a subplot if it were limited just to that scope. So I guess that's how I would look at it, yeah. Everything that's getting in the way of Frodo's journey towards Mordor, I would say, is the A story.
Okay, cool, man. Thank you. I know it was a bit of a dumb one, but cheers.
That's okay. Yeah, no, it was good thoughts. I just wasn't exactly sure how to approach answering, but hopefully that gives you some things to think about. So let's look at, and look, I finally actually figured out how to put GIFs into these presentations. Let's talk about this B story as barometer of character growth. So this classic screenwriting technique in a script is one with only one major subplot, which a lot of kind of standard Hollywood-ish movie scripts are going to have, is to make that secondary story feature your main character in some aspect or facet of your life, like Tamara mentioned. And we can think of this classic romance B story, as dated as this concept might be a little bit, we can see the function of them. So, imagine your hero is a cop, for instance, trying to stop bad guys from blowing up a building, but he's also trying to fix his fractured relationship with his ex-wife. Or an underdog college student is trying to win the singing contest, for instance, and also trying to get the popular guy to fall in love with her. And in these, usually the character won't really be able to solve the problem of the A story without first resolving some deeper issue that manifests in that subplot. So that action hero might need to kind of learn to work with a team, or be a team player, for instance, or he might need to learn to not be the one in charge all the time, or he might need to learn humbleness or discipline or any number of things. The student in the other example might need to learn confidence and self-respect, which is going to kind of manifest by her in that romance. This is the sort of romance B story model. The B stories are kind of used here as a measure of how far the main character has come in this otherwise internal goal. So we're sort of using the B story to externalize an internal conflict of your character that they will need to beat in order to win in the A story. So in this model, essentially the B story teaches them what they're lacking or missing, which is the key to succeeding in the A story. I'm sure you guys have actually seen a million examples of this, even though it can be kind of hard to just think of off the top of your head. But basically watch any movie from the 80s or 90s with a romance subplot, especially action, adventure, or horror, things like this, wherein there's sort of an underwritten, you look at all the 80s comedies where the main character is trying to win the battle of the bands, but they're also trying to get the girl. But the reason they can't win the battle of the bands is because they haven't learned to, express themselves. And the girl they're with is a sculptor or something, and in order to impress her, they join the sculpting class, and through that he learns how to really express himself, and because of that he gets the girl or whatever, and because of gaining that confidence, now he's able to go back and win that battle of the bands with the confidence that he earned. And the girl is the prize or whatever, which is the crappy, this is what I'm talking about, this is a dated technique. But we can see how it can actually be used. I hope we can think of ways that it can actually be used well. Obviously, we don't want to use the love interest as a prize for the character, but it's okay to use that contrast or use that B story as a way to show something that main character is struggling with in a different arena of their life, something that might be holding them back from otherwise succeeding in that A story. Hope that makes sense. So use that, understand how that works, and maybe when you're watching, especially 70s, 80s, if we go before that, there's atrocious examples of this in older movies too, but it doesn't have to be used for this kind of dated romance technique. This can be used for all kinds of stuff. Think of just that basic mechanical principle where the main character is now being forced to deal with some other problem, or maybe it's not, the main character may not even always be in the B story, but in this model of it, it's just the main character and their kid, and their wife, and their best friend, something like that. In which they'll need to learn that skill or that whatever it is to succeed in the A story. Roman says it's a wonderful life of the angel. Yeah, basically. So Jimmy Stewart's character, his relationship with Clarence and the whole journey he goes on with Clarence is going to give him that appreciation of his life that he's going to need to realize that no man is poor who has friends, that sort of thing, and he actually comes back to Bedford Falls at the end. Aeronomadic asks, is Big Fish a good example? Big Fish is a very good example with lots of subplots and that do all these same sorts of things that are all relating back to these main key themes. They all do a great job of reinforcing the key themes of that story. The fact that we come to see that those subplots didn't actually play out the way that we thought they did. The dad's adventure with the giant was actually just a very tall guy, for instance, towards the end. It goes on to show that, although it may not have literally been true, it's really no less true for its inclusion in this story, or however that quote goes, right? It's full of lies that are no less true for their inclusion. Something like that. So the fact that we see towards the end all those subplots are actually real in a way, but not the way we thought, is very powerful. Subplot techniques. One, so subplots add depth. Weaving several plot lines together through a story can create this sense of multi-level narrative. A story with just a main plot can come off as sort of flat, whereas a story with more narrative threads can feel more well-realized or complete. It might be necessary sometimes to use multiple points of view to fully explore a complex world or situation, which TV is much better at than features are doing. But you can see how, having whole scenes with just your villain doing stuff, or just your main character's family members doing stuff, or just other, think of something like Breaking Bad, where we show so many different perspectives. It's not all just Walter and Jesse, which it would be if it was a movie. Subplots intensify the conflict as well. They are a tool that can heighten that tension and intensify the conflict of the story. They can add these new plot points and deliver obstacles for the main character that are ultimately going to result in a more dramatic climax, because as we're moving through the story, regardless of what's going on in those subplots, we still need to be following that sort of, Freytag's basic pyramid of progression, where we are getting more and more difficult obstacles as the story goes on until we get to the most difficult one of all, like that sort of just basic roller coaster loop or arc of the narrative. Let's look a little bit at Squid Game in a second, but I want to talk about subplots enriching character development, because they reveal new information about main characters, and the main character interacting with supporting characters in that subplot can shed light on their different traits or flaws, which make them feel much more three-dimensional. Basically, subplots work really well when they highlight contrast. They can contrast the other narrative threads and make them feel more important or feel more powerful. So let's look at episode 6 of Squid Game. If you don't want spoilers for this show, I would mute the next 10-ish minutes of class and come back. All right, so let's break this one down. This is probably the best and saddest episode of this entire show. We're going to look at Gunbu, which is the marble episode, if you guys have seen this before. So, what is the basic setup of Squid Game? There's a bunch of different characters that all show up on this they sign up for this illegal underground death game, where if they survive every round, then they get a bunch of money, and every person that dies in the game increases the total money that they will win by the end. So up until this episode, our main character, whose name is Gihun, he has been competing in these really, really challenging, difficult, sometimes kind of complicated games, in which the stakes are really immediate. Usually it's them versus somebody else that they hate, so it kind of has that easy adversarial nature to it. And it's usually pitting people directly against each other. In this episode, the game that they learn that they're going to be playing is a simple game of marbles. They are asked to each choose a partner, and all our characters partner up with the person that they like the most and think that they're going to work the best with, which is what makes this the cruelest of all the games, because very quickly after choosing their partners, then they realize only one of each partnership is going to survive these games. So that immediately is generating instant drama, where all these characters pair up with someone they've come to care about, and then immediately afterwards we have to say, oh god, now they're gonna essentially have to choose which one of them lives and which one of them dies. They're allowed to make up whatever rules they want for the marble game, and whoever wins the other person's marbles by the end lives, and the other one gets shot, and they have like 30 minutes to do it. Excuse me. So, our main character is Gi-hun, as we see here on the left, and he's going to just be the spine of the story. All the A story is going to be whatever he's up against in that episode, and we're really following him. But each of these other characters are contrasting in very fascinating ways that make this episode really, really sing. So, let's look at the partnerships as they are in the episode, and the themes that each one of them brings out, and the ways they contrast with each other. So, our first partnership is Gi-hun and Il-nam, the old man, who we don't know almost anything about and seems to have Alzheimer's and can't even remember his own name for most of this. So Gi-hun partners with him. He's like, hey, let's work together. You're kind of an underdog like me. We're going to be great. Let's beat this thing. Then we have Se-byuk and Jeong. Se-byuk over here on the right is essentially our B story for this episode and for a lot of the show. She partners with Jeong, who's a somewhat later introduced character, but they are becoming. They have been, slowly drifting towards becoming friends up until now. We have Sang-woo and Ali. Sang-woo being the guy who starts off as Gi-hun's friend, but gets more and more vicious and ruthless over the course of the show. And this episode is really the one that turns us against him and makes us realize this guy will do anything to survive, including betray the most lovable characters. And last, we have Doksu and a guy named 278, who we don't even have on here because he doesn't have a real name. And this D story kind of serves a different sort of purpose. So we'll look at what all of these are for. So, let's first look at how these unfold. These plot lines, first of all, unveil in descending order of importance. So look how we go A, B, C, D as we open up these storylines. But they conclude in ascending order of importance. We conclude D, then we conclude C, then we conclude B, and then finally A. And a lot of plotting kind of works like this. So I'd keep that in mind if you haven't seen that before. Then that idea of introduce the most important thing first, and then less important. And then when we conclude them, we want to conclude the most important thing last. That's a really common technique in just all of storytelling. But let's look at what each of these things is for. So the D story, remember we're unfolding them one at a time. We set up Gi-hun and Il-nam, Se-byuk and Jeong, Sang-woo and Ali, Doksu and 278. They're all left to figure out, oh god, what do I do now? How do I figure out, is there a way I can figure out how I can not kill my partner? Is there a way that we can both win the game? What happens if we tie? But ultimately, they're forced to make up a marble game and play it against each other. So the D story is sort of setting the baseline for what the competition should look like. Doksu and 278 hate each other. They work against each other. They play a marble shooting game where they just try to knock each other's marbles out of the ring. It's like tense, but at the end, Doksu gets the win. He beats 278. He's like, yes, screw you. And 278 runs off and gets shot by the guards. And Doksu is like, I did it. I nailed it. I beat it. I'm the king of this game. Now, that's what the game is supposed to be like, or that's what it's, quote, supposed to be like. And every other competition now feels so much more tragic and dark as a result of that. Because we've seen what it's intended to be, or what it should be, and now the fact is that all these other people care about each other. And so we're going to have to watch each of them decide, do I betray this person, or do I not? So, Sang-woo and Ali is the second story that we go into, and that's the one where, and obviously these are all intercut throughout the episode, but I'm just going to kind of address them in the order that makes the most sense. But Sang-woo is the guy who, remember, he's been getting worse and worse over the course of the show, and Ali is kind of the fan favorite, most lovable character that everybody is sort of rooting for. He's got a wife and baby at home. He's an immigrant. He has had a super hard life. He owes a ton of money to a lot of people. He's doing this for all the right reasons. He always does the right thing. He always is there for moral support. He's everyone's favorite. And Sang-woo is, in this storyline, he uses that against Ali. And we sort of see the cost of kindness. And, you wouldn't think, it's weird to think for in some instances, what's the actual cost of being a good person who does the right thing? And the great thing about stories that, like this, I mean, this sort of death game subgenre does a really good job of asking, well, but do you, somebody choosing to do the right thing is such a common thing that we see in media that we forget sometimes how difficult that is sometimes. I said sometimes twice, but I hope you see what I mean. So, Sang-woo and Ali, at first, they start playing. Sang-woo starts losing, so he's like, wait, I have an idea. I think I'm going to come up with a way for us both to win. I bet if we tie and another team ties, then they'll put us in a sudden death afterwards. That's kind of consistent with what they've done in this game before, right? And Ali's like, okay, really? I don't know. And Sang-woo's like, yeah, it'll work. And he ends up tricking him, stealing all of his marbles and replacing them with rocks. And he ends up kind of ruthlessly going to the guards, turning in the marbles, and Ali's like, hey man, where are you? He upends his bag of marbles and a bunch of rocks fell out, and he realizes that the person who he has grown to be the closest with in this game just betrayed him in the most horrible way. And we kind of see this betrayal, right? This is like the worst version of a person that you could become through playing games, this game, or games like this. The next one, Se-byuk and Ji-young, is about the opposite of that. Remember, we're doing contrast. So we start with the baseline. Then we go to this game turning people into the worst versions of themselves. Now we're going to go to the game showing people becoming the best versions of themselves in what is really, I think, the most moving subplot in the entire show. Ji-young has come from a kind of hard life. When she was a kid, she saw her dad murder her mom, and she ended up stabbing her dad to death. And so she's been in jail for years and just got out of jail. And the day she got out of jail, she got offered to come be in the Squid Game and was like, okay, I don't have anything else going on. Go ahead and put me in the death game. And in the meantime, Se-byuk is doing this because she has a little brother, and he is stuck in the foster care system, I think, and desperately needs money. And she has family back in North Korea that she's trying to get over. And we really see Se-byuk's pain and suffering and all the reasons why she needs to do this, and they're like really, really good, strong reasons. And through the course of their conversation and of their marble game, Ji-young kind of realizes it too. And she makes, although remember we just saw Sang-woo become the worst version of somebody that this game could turn you into, Ji-young decides, I'm going to just let you win. And she just drops her marble instead of throwing it towards the wall like they were planning on doing. And she's like, I've thought about it, we talked enough, and I realized you have better reasons for living than me. And so you can have it. You can just have it. And Se-byuk is like, no, we can't do that. You have to actually play the game, be fair. And Ji-young's like, nah, it's all yours. Go ahead. And that level, the depth of that sacrifice is really emphasized by the fact that we just saw the complete opposite of it. We just saw a guy become the worst version of himself. He tricks the other guy. He uses his kindness against him. And Ji-young, on the other hand, is like, I'm going to give my entire life for somebody I just met a couple days ago because I made the objective moral decision that her life is worth more than mine, in a way. And so that's so heartbreaking and tragic and really stands in direct opposition to everything we just saw. We saw what the game is supposed to be like. We saw it turning someone into a monster. Now we see it turning someone into, essentially, not an angel, but like, a better choice than almost anyone would ever make. And now we get back to our A story, in which we see Gi-hun and Il-nam, and Gi-hun is presented with this question of, do I become the worst person? Do I become Sang-woo? Or can I perhaps aspire to become Ji-young? Right? So we come to realize that Il-nam has dementia and can't tell what the rules are of the game, and Gi-hun is able to manipulate him more and more. He's tempted to become like Sang-woo, and he starts to trick him into getting more and more of his marbles until he's got only one left, at which point Il-nam reveals, wait, I actually know what you've been doing. And Gi-hun is like, what? Oh god, I'm dead, right? And Il-nam is like, no, it's okay, I forgive you. And he gives him his last marble and is like, you're young, I had a good time doing this, enjoy. Like, and it's through that, it's through like the fact that Gi-hun has tried out Sang-woo's method, or the most possible selfish thing you could do. That's what he tried at first. But it's only when Il-nam forgives him for that he learns he might be able to aspire to Ji-young's sacrifice. And in that way, the C story plus the B story kind of equals the A story thematically. We see the betrayal, the worst version, we see the sacrifice, the best version, and the main character is forced to find his way between those two things. And what the character takes from this moving forward is a synthesis of these two ideas, where he's seen the power of, or he's seen the darkness and the depth of betrayal, and he's also seen the power of sacrifice and decided, I'm going to try to be more like that as opposed to the first thing. Okay. That was a lot of info for somebody, especially if you have not seen this Korean TV show. But hope that you guys, at least this is making sense to you, and anyone who's seen the show. Anyone have any comments or questions just about this idea of how subplots can contrast with each other to make the other ones feel stronger? No questions or comments. That's okay. Let's keep going. We got plenty to do. I gotta make sure to check the stream chat sometimes too. Okay, no one in there. Let's keep going from squid-based games to a galaxy-based quest. So that was TV. And as we know in TV, you have less time than you do in a movie, and we also, in a way, have more time because we'll have other episodes. And so that the main character doesn't have to be in every episode as much as the A story takes up less precedence in an individual episode of TV than it would otherwise in a movie, where it's just going to be sort of like the majority of the time we spend, maybe like 65% of the movie, whereas like 35% of the movie is going to be spent on subplots in most cases. Maybe there's different ratios for that. If you look at something like a Wes Anderson movie or whatever, or like, you know, like a Tarantino movie, it might be much more evenly spread or distributed, but still, that A story is where we're going to be spending a lot of our time in movies. And so I have certain ways of keeping us on track when it comes to that sort of story. I find it really helpful to use this technique. I'll just skip to the end really quick because this is my last slide for some reason. You don't have to use this, but I like this rule that every scene should start with a conflict directly related to your A story, most likely just the main character trying to accomplish something directly related to the A story, or it should end reconnecting to your A story, but even in a small way. And if every scene does that, you'll never drift too far from the spine of the narrative, because... Here, let me move out of the way. You'll never drift too far from the spine of the narrative, because it'll always leave us kind of... I wish I had a board to draw on, but it leaves us like branching off, then coming back. You branch off, then you come back. You branch off, then you come back. And so that A story kind of like remains really concrete and consistent, and the subplots all can sort of blossom from it in such a way that they all go to support it. So that's just a technique that I use. You don't always have to do that. That won't always work. But let's look at Galaxy Quest. So, what's the plot of Galaxy Quest? This is about the cast of a kind of Star Trek type TV show that's now off the air, but they are making most of their money through appearances and fan conventions and things like that. And almost all of them have lost their passion for the characters. They've lost their appreciation of the fans. And ultimately, the movie is sort of just a celebration of these of fandom, of liking stuff, of liking media. And the main characters, although they have become these disillusioned people that aren't anything like the heroes they portrayed on the screen, it's really going to be the journey of them through a real-life space adventure, having to kind of become their characters, or better versions of their characters. So, let's look at the subplots in Galaxy Quest and all the ways that these come back to support that A story, and the ways that they all resolve separately, and we're going to just kind of tie everything together. So, let's get going. So the premise, or I guess in our first act, we can look at this little paragraph here as a kind of to orient us. The cast of an old 1980s space adventure television series, Galaxy Quest, spend most of their days attending fan conventions and making promotional appearances. Though the series' conceited former star, Jason, thrives on the attention, the other cast members, Gwen, Alexander, Fred, and Tommy, resent him, and to varying degrees the state of their careers. So we're going to be looking at the subplots for each of these characters, who each goes through their own arc. And we have Guy over here too, one of the best characters in the whole movie, but he's so small that I guess he wasn't included in the main part of the wiki. We got a question from Jill Tool. Can I go back? Can I go back to what? Sorry, which slide should I go back to? He says all good. Okay, I'll link the slides if you want to.
Nacho's just linked the live YouTube.
Oh,
so
great.
I'm just gonna go back on that.
Okay, sure. Yeah, we'll link the presentation itself if you want to browse the slides later. Okay, so here's our main cast. We have Tim Allen as Jason. We have Sigourney Weaver as Gwen. We have Alan Rickman as Alexander. We have Sam Rockwell as Guy, of course. I can't remember these two actors' names, but we have Fred and Tommy. So, to get to the subplots first, we have to let's look at this little note that I have here. So, this is what Sigourney Weaver really liked about the script in the first place. This is from the wiki. She claims that it was this sort of Wizard of Oz story of these people each feel so incomplete at the beginning. And maybe Wizard of Oz is just another really good example to look at, right? All the characters feel incomplete, and then during the course of it, they come out as the heroes they pretended to be in the first place. So really, a kind of more advanced or better version of that hero that character was portraying before. Wizard of Oz, I think we all remember. Who are the subplot characters in Wizard of Oz? Just the main
The
trio.
lion, the Tin Man, and Scarecrow.
Yeah,
And Dorothy.
Right, so Dorothy's are kind of A story, our main character, and then the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, and the Lion. So what do each of the subplot characters need?
The lion, he requires courage.
Mm-hmm.
The Tin Man requires a new heart.
Yep.
The Scarecrow Man, he requires a brain.
Right. Exactly. And go ahead.
Dorothy, I think, requires her way home.
Yeah, she's just trying to go home. But we can see, like, that very basic idea of the Tin Man needs a heart. The Scarecrow needs a brain. It's just a way of expressing kind of, like, the Tin Man needs a sense of empathy, perhaps. The Scarecrow needs, I'm not exactly sure how we would phrase. I don't even remember how he gets a brain exactly, but I think we could just look at that as just the baseline of this character needs this internal trait in order to succeed at the A story. This character needs this internal trait, and those are the traits of theirs that are going to be tested again and again as the story goes on. Remember the scene in the woods where the Cowardly Lion, he is, for a moment it seems like he's going to defend the group from the witch, but then he loses his nerve and he runs off. And we need to actually see them fail at these things a couple times in order for us to really get what they need from it and to watch them change and develop over the course of the story using these kind of markers, or what I mentioned before as these sort of like waypoints of progress that the characters have made. Whether it goes, I talked about the guy sharing the sandwich, right? He never shares his sandwiches until the halfway point in the story. He shares half a sandwich with somebody. Then by the end, he shares the whole thing. And we kind of use that to show how much that character has grown. And visually doing this is really key to working in movies and TV for the most part. We can't really do this in the characters' minds as we can as much in a book. But let's look at Galaxy Quest subplots. Look at all these. A lot of different characters. A lot going on in this very well-paced, concise movie. We have a comment on YouTube. Reverb says he had a brain all along. Thank you for that. And that also is a lot of the time kind of what makes a subplot work, is the character trying so long to get something and then they realize, oh, the magic was in you all along. And that's the real thing they gained from the story, was recognizing that. So let's go through this. We'll briefly touch on our A story just so we know what's going on. But Jason, the arrogant captain, if I haven't fully explained the plot, but basically, remember, he's like a Shatner type actor. He's the only one that loves the show and loves his character on the show and has never kind of gotten over that. He's sort of the opposite of all the other characters who are completely detached from their old show Galaxy Quest at this point. They sort of hate it. They resent it. They hate being pigeonholed as a result of it. They hate having to go to sign stuff at fan conventions. They hate people asking questions about, in episode 37B, did you know that the galaxy was, that a flux capacitor could blah, blah, blah. So they resent the show, whereas Jason is way too into it. So the thing that he needs to actually learn is humbleness. He needs to actually become a good captain. And so when the cast of this TV show are picked up by real aliens who think that the old episodes of their show are historical documents, because they have no concept of fiction or lying, then the main characters are sort of forced to become an actual starship crew to save these aliens from an evil bug race led by this guy named Sarius. So, if we remember that Jason's thing is that he actually is too in love with himself, that's the kind of classic Shatner-Kirk kind of problem, right? He's so in love with himself and his character that the point of his development in the A story is to realize that he isn't the hero he thinks he wants to be. The crew are the real heroes, and ultimately it's his job to find ways to best utilize all their talents and let them work together, and to sort of take a step back and say, this isn't just my ship and my show. This is our ship and our show. So we have this great moment in the, I think it's around the midpoint or a little later in the escalation, where he's kind of forced to explain to the aliens that they are not actually the characters from the show, and that it's such a big betrayal. It feels like a huge betrayal in this moment, and it's actually also this character having to say, I'm not really this captain. Like, the fact that he has to explain that to somebody makes him realize it. In the same way that I talked about Merry and Pippin being forced to explain to Treebeard why Treebeard should protect Middle Earth, is also them realizing why they should take a direct role in the war. It's the same thing with Jason in Galaxy Quest. Him explaining to Mathazar why the show is fake. None of it's real. He has to go through step by step. None of it's real. I'm not really that guy. Is him kind of for himself having to realize that. And as a result, he sort of becomes this person that is willing to step back and say, my crew are the heart and soul of this, and I need to bring out the best parts of them. I need to be... A captain isn't the star, or a captain shouldn't be the star on his own. He's only the star because of the people that help him. So that's our sort of A story. Jason didn't need to rediscover his love for Galaxy Quest because he always loved Galaxy Quest. But every other character is so disillusioned that our B story probably is going to be Alexander's, Alan Rickman's character. And just he's the one that wears the sort of head alien, I don't know what you call that, prosthetic. And he resents his character. He hates dressing up more than any of them. He's a classically trained, like, Shakespearean actor. And now he's stuck with a catchphrase. He used to do Hamlet, but now everyone only knows this line that he used to say, by Grabthar's hammer you will be avenged, right? And he hates it more than any of them. Throughout this experience where he's trying to save the Thermians, his subplot with a young sycophantic fan of his, like one of the aliens who's obsessed with his character, and he's the favorite character. This kid, he ends up, throughout the whole movie, again and again, this kid is like, I'm going to try to save the day just like you did back in episode 12. And Alexander's like, shut up, kid. The show's not real. The show is dumb. And again, this kid's like, I'm going to one day maybe be as good a captain or as good a whatever science officer as you, Alexander. And he's like, shut up, kid. The show is dumb. The Galaxy Quest is dumb. By the end, this kid gets shot. And this movie's actually surprisingly violent for a PG movie, I will say. But as he gets shot and is dying, and he says, like, his final speech is so heartbreaking. He's like, of all of the accomplishments of my life, it was my greatest honor to have served. I know the show wasn't real. You've explained that to us. But my greatest honor was to be able to serve under the great, whatever his, science officer character's name is. And in that moment, when he's surrounded by all the other Thermians who are, like, really sad, Alexander says his old line again, by Grabthar's hammer. You will be avenged. And he's forced to really find the sort of sentiment of it and the heart and soul of why that line matters. And, like, he rediscovers not only his role, his love and respect for the role, but for the audience, which he had come to resent so much. But if we look at this kid as kind of a representation of the audience, he comes to see what his character and the show has meant to people. And because of that, he's able to accept and come into his own in that role for real. So we have Gwen, that's Sigourney Weaver's character, who we go from this line of, I mean, before she's on the show, she was sort of the eye candy, I think was her role. She has, like, basically no job on the ship. Her job is to be the person that's like, computer, tell us how far it is to the Galthazar sector. Even though anyone could ask that, but it's her job to do it. And she has this great part where she's like, look, I have one job on this ship. It's stupid, but I'm going to do it. To ultimately, accepting her role as valuable and necessary by the end. I think we have to connect her much more with the A story, and this does have a little bit of that 90s kind of romance B story thing I was talking about, where in order to make his romance with Gwen work, our main character, like, she serves as kind of a milestone in his own development. So Gwen is probably the least developed of these characters in a kind of 90s comedy kind of way. It's true. Not that it's a badly written movie, but we see that she, like, doesn't have as strong of an arc as anyone else, but we can still see the fact that she does very clearly go from thinking my job is dumb and useless to maybe realizing what it is that I can contribute and realizing the things that I am actually good at and the ways that I can help this team. We have Tommy, who gains confidence. This is like the Cowardly Lion, right? Best exemplified by the bookends of his early scenes flying the ship, in which he thinks he has no idea what he's doing. He's like, oh god, I'm afraid to even touch the controls. And he scrapes the hull against the hangar wall, and he hits every mine in the minefield. And Alan Rickman's like, do you have to hit every single mine? And we compare that to the end, where at which point he's done lots of difficult stuff. They've really relied on him and counted on him. And if you watched him gain that courage, and at the end he skillfully navigates that same minefield from the beginning, but he misses every mine, or he actually is able to drive around them in such a way that he's able to drag them behind the ship and use them against the bad guy. So he becomes this expert pilot by overcoming this trait of lacking confidence for himself. We have Guy as well, who also gains this sort of courage, or moreover with Guy, he goes to somebody that has accepted the fact that he might die, or he's accepted that his death might even be the thing that saves the day. He was the red shirt on the show. And he goes from this kind of panicking coward who's so terrified of his own mortality and the fact that he expects to or thinks he might die that he can't even contribute to the team. He goes to this sort of, gun-wielding action hero who realizes, yeah, okay, I'm going to die, but I can use that to help save the day. And then last we have Fred, who's this weird disaffected stoner who ends up falling in love with one of the Thermians, and they're happy together, basically. And I So I guess I'd have to watch it again to really tell you what exactly is the thing that he gains or learns from this, because he's actually kind of one of the flattest, least dynamic of these characters, but in a very funny way, like in a very intentional way. And I think if everything else is well balanced, you really just do get a few freebies to do whatever you want. This is what I was saying earlier in terms of just the fun factor. If a subplot is really fun, then we give you more leeway to do what you want with it. So, a lot of characters there. We had our A story. We have essentially a B, C, D, little e, tiny F stories, but all of them are branching off from this same A. Like, it's not like these people are in different movies. It's not like they're doing different things. It's not like one of them's on a different planet. They're all on the same ship, and these are all ultimately elements of the A story. And if we remember that the A story is Jason becoming a great captain that has to work with all these different people, then we can look at each of these subplots as just pieces of the A story. But they each do have their own catalysts, development, markers of progress, and ultimately resolution that shows that character becoming this sort of synthesis that we talk about sometimes in terms of character development in a story, where if a character starts the story in the first act one way, the second act is them challenging that way that they are, or that they used to be, and having to learn new things. Then the final act will be them synthesizing who they always were with whatever they've learned or gained or come to appreciate or come to understand over the course of that story. They become essentially the best version of themselves. Him or herself, I should say, not themselves. Okay, so that's the Galaxy Quest subplots. I have a couple more tips. Let me just see if we have questions or comments on Galaxy Quest and the way that it's handling all these different characters, dynamics. Maybe some people have seen this movie and want to weigh in. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a very good movie. And I like the idea that they become the characters that they portray, basically. Yeah, and each of them, basically, as you said, go through their own transition into their character.
Yeah, and to me, I think... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. That's mostly all I had to say, but it's a very good movie, and I recommend it.
Right. Same. So, like... Yeah, so Jason ultimately does kind of become the Captain Kirk, right? But he becomes like a better version of that because he has the humility that he gained over the course of the journey. So they they become like an improvement on the original characters, or like those roles that they used to fulfill.
Home Improvement, Tim Allen.
A Home Improvement, very good. Well done. Anyone else? We have some questions in the chat. How do you format subplots into a show? Go ahead.
Another thing that I guess it's the subplot is the guy at the very end who is the fan who ultimately helps them fly the ship or whatever at the very, very end.
Yeah.
Yeah, Justin Long. And I guess it's the ultimate conclusion of all their plots of understanding the fan perspective and then allowing a fan to actually like help them in their crisis, you know?
Yeah, I think so. You're right. That is sort of like a mini subplot within the A story, in the same sense that
it's like a pretty small plot, but it's like pretty important by the end.
Yeah, it bookends the whole movie. You're right, and it sort of represents their relationship with the fandom. Where at the beginning they're annoyed by Justin Long's character coming up and being like, "Well, why didn't the thorium reactor work like this in episode 35?" And they're like, "It's a show. It's just a show. Writers came up with this. I don't know. I don't care." But by the end, they come to see why it's important to have fans that actually pay it lots and lots of attention, and they come to really see the value of that when Justin Long's character is forced to use his knowledge of the show to walk them through a dangerous section of the ship that otherwise would kill them, and then he helps to bring them all to the convention center on Earth where they crash land in front of a big audience and they shoot the bad guy and everyone cheers and claps for them, and it's sort of like the version of the fan, like their interaction with the fans that they wish they had at the beginning, like them actually coming out one at a time and being like, I am this character, everyone cheers and loves them, and they realize like that's like the kind of climax of everything, because it shows all of them become like, you know, accepting their new roles or becoming the person that they only could have become due to this both this experience of the movie and moreover the whole Justin Long subplot. So I forget that character's name, but yeah, that character is great too and really makes the movie come together. Okay, so other questions, comments about Galaxy Quest before we move on to questions on other things? Okay, so let's wrap up the main part of the lecture here, and I'll take everything I'll look at all the questions in the chat that I wasn't able to get to yet, and also we will end with a couple tips. I have a few slides of just last techniques, last thoughts to kind of wrap everything up. So the first thing I'll say is, unless you're doing a rare true ensemble story, which would be one of these ones like I'm struggling to even think. Go? Is Go an example of this? Where each of the characters... Go ahead.
Oh, I just had an example. Like, I think the movie Love Actually, maybe?
Sure, I haven't actually seen that one, but yeah, I've understood.
Yeah, it's just mostly just so many subplots. It's like 17 ridiculous amounts.
Yeah, it's basically just a bunch of subplots or a bunch of short stories. Those do exist. And they can definitely work and are really tricky to make it work. I will say, unless you're doing that, the A story can be treated like a vehicle that can be driven around to explore all the different subplots. So imagine that we are in this car with the main character, and as we drive around, we're sort of like seeing stuff out the window, and sometimes a subplot might run across the road and they have to slam the brakes. Or sometimes I don't know, this metaphor has maybe gotten out of hand, but you can see maybe that this is like a vehicle. We're going to drive around to all these different stories, and we're going to see all these different ways that the main character could be. We're going to see the different routes that they threaten to go down, perhaps. If we have a character that is, struggling with a choice to, I don't know, join the special forces and do messed up things for a living, but in exchange for lots of money, then we can have another character that represents that kind of life or that world. A special forces character that's like, yeah, I'm rich, you should come do what I do. But really we see they're a terrible person. So it kind of is like an embodiment of the cost and consequences of that potential choice. That's a great thing to do with subplots like Frodo and Gollum. He's representing the stakes, representing what Frodo could ultimately become. That's a way we can look at it. And all your different stories are going to be, branching and blossoming out, but ultimately kind of coming back to and supporting and advancing your A story. Sometimes the B story will push the car along the road, or sometimes a C or a B or whatever story will throw a spike strip in front of the car, to belabor the metaphor. In any case, in features that are not true ensemble pieces, we really have to be keeping the architecture of the A story in the forefront. And you can use my little technique I suggest on the next page, where if we start every scene with a conflict related to the A, or we end it with a conflict related to the A, then we won't ever drift way too far. And we shouldn't typically be doing multiple scenes in a row of characters that are not linked to your A story at all. If we are doing, there is a certain maybe very deft touch that you could use to pull something like that off. If you're Michael Mann or Tarantino or somebody like that, I'm sure you could pull it off. But for the most part, in a movie, and not on TV, TV has different rules, but in a movie, don't typically go more than a couple scenes without reconnecting to your A story. Otherwise, you're going to risk losing the audience. And I think some movies that do play this really broad ensemble do lose the audience. What was I just talking about? Hail Caesar? That was a well-reviewed movie, but the cinema score, which is what the audience gives it as they walk out of the theater, is like a D+, or like a C-, or something abysmal like that. Because, and I think this is why, it isn't that interested in its A story. Like, it's equally interested in doing a bunch of, the Coen brothers are geniuses, and everything they do, I think, should be studied to kind of realize what's possible in the medium and things like this. So I'm not saying they did a bad job or whatever. But just that I see why that movie had a bad audience reaction and wasn't a huge classic hit from them. It's because we've drifted very far from the A story to the point that the A story stops feeling like it even matters that much. It almost starts to feel incidental or just like an excuse for all these other things to branch off from it. Now, that movie had very different goals and aims than most movies do. I think people would have loved it a lot more, though, if we had focused on Eddie Mannix trying to get George Clooney's character back from the kidnappers. Then I think that audiences would have loved that. I mean, it's hard to put George Clooney and Scarlett Johansson and Channing Tatum in a movie, then have it get a D+ cinema score. So you see kind of the cost of drifting too far from that central spine of the A story, or I hope you do at least. It's not that it can't be a good piece of art, but you're going to lose people. You just are. We're not really conditioned, at least in Western modern traditions, we're not very well conditioned to understand stories that drift too far from their protagonist. Well, just after a certain point, we're going to be like, well, what am I watching? I'm sure there's examples, and maybe you have some things in mind of movies that pull this off really well. And I think in Eastern traditions, like, people are always citing things like Wong Kar-wai movies, which I've never seen any of, but people often say he does this great job of balancing this very big web of characters where the A story is not that central to the understanding of the full piece, or things like this. But generally, the A story is really going to be key, and every subplot should support and advance it in some kind of way, or be used to contrast your main character in some kind of way, or you contrast a person to your main character that represents something that some option, some choice that they could take, some threat that they are facing, or reminding us what the stakes are. So keep that A story really, really central in your movies, unless you know exactly what you're doing and you're willing to go very far off the beaten path. TV is different, because TV, we just have so much more room to explore different characters, and the expectation is after the pilot there's going to be many more episodes that are going to elevate different characters to story importance at different times, in which case that character might even become kind of the lead for a while. So I can't really give you tips on that, because mostly what we're writing is features and pilots. We're not writing entire TV shows. As people trying to break into the industry, we're not writing full TV shows. So I wouldn't worry about how to do that as much. If you're just trying to get involved in this, look at subplots on a pilot basis or on the basis of a feature. I wouldn't really concern too deeply with how to make subplots work in an entire show, which is just a monumental undertaking and has a lot of different, very, very different rules to it. But in any case, don't drift too far from that A story, and you won't run that risk of losing the audience. Paul has an example. French Dispatch. Yeah, that's another sort of ensemble movie that it's basically it's an anthology. Actually, it's not even a traditionally structured movie in any sense. It's like a bunch of short stories that take place in the same city. But yeah, you can totally do that too. You can make unconventional stuff. You can try unconventional things. The audience may not always be in tune with what you are doing, and you will be docked points accordingly. If the audience doesn't like it, they're not going to be like, well, but you tried, so I'll give you a good review. Very often. Some people will, but like usually if you try something really out of the box or different, you're welcome to do so, but there are risks associated, and that biggest risk is just going to be losing fans, or people stop reading, or they turn off the TV. All right, let's take questions on things we've talked about, and then I'm going to scroll up in the chat and address all the points that I haven't gotten to yet. So, any last questions on sort of that balance of A stories to these different subplots, and allowing your subplots to blossom from the A story before returning to support and advance it? Any questions about these last concepts?
So I have a question. This is mainly like having to do with like a show or a TV pilot, especially.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, with Stranger Things, like in the pilot, you have like I think at least 3 subplots, and like for example, you have the main plot, which is like Will is missing, but then there's like a plot to where Will's friends, they try to find him, and then there's another subplot that has to do with the like Will's mom trying to get to the bottom of things and figure out why and how her son got missing, and then there's another subplot that has to do with teen characters. And then I think there's a minor subplot that has to do with the government and the lab trying to get like 11.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like my question I always had with this kind of thing was that how do you exactly like balance all of this, especially if you only have like, I don't know, 60 pages or less or a little more. So it's like, for example, like you might dedicate like 10 pages to one subplot, but then it's like another one might have less or more. So it's like, how do you exactly know when to switch between the two, or like how to balance them?
Great question.
So they don't feel out of place or abrupt.
Right. So you have to realize which ones are most important, and you need to give more time to the more important ones. I guess is just the basics of it. So we were looking at Galaxy Quest earlier, and we identified the A story, which is going to take the preponderance of screen time. And then from there on, you have to, especially in TV, you're mostly going to look at those other subplots through whichever characters are paired up trying to accomplish a goal. So if the main sort of problem in Stranger Things is this kid named Will is missing, and now a bunch of people are trying to find him and get him back, that's sort of the thrust of the journey that we're on. And we're going to look at those different subplots from the perspective of the pairings of characters. So our A story is going to be, what's his name? Mike and 11 and their team trying to get Will back from the government. We have our B story, which would probably be Hopper and Winona Ryder's character, whose name I forget, as they are sort of working together. Hopper says, "I'm going to find your son." She's like, "You can't find him. He's in a different dimension." Everyone's like, "You're crazy, Joyce." Thank you. So we have them essentially working together as our other pair up, and then our third pair up is going to be, is it Nancy and Steve? I think. And
I think it's Nancy and Steve, and like pretty much that. But it's like they have nothing to do with the original plot. It's like it's Nancy and Steve, but then also you have like Jonathan.
Right.
But it's kind of confusing because within the first episode, their plots are completely different. So like mainly with Nancy and Steve, they're just like doing teenage things during all the drama. You know, nothing really special. Like they, for example, they go to the party. You know.
But doesn't
that
their friend
Steve
get
is
eaten
having
by
at his house.
a monster at the end of the episode, or towards
yes,
the end? She does. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that is more about that setting. Like you're right that they don't in a longer form TV show like this that's essentially a long movie. I mean, this was a limited series to begin with, so that is kind of like a long movie. Then we're sort of setting the expectation that these characters are going to become involved in the plot afterwards, and we clearly see how they are going to become involved in that A story. So you can start the other characters doing something else in a TV show especially, and then bring them in, like rope them into the story eventually. But I think if we broke it down though, then I think we would see who gets the most pages. Mike and 11 probably, and then who gets the second most pages? Joyce and Hopper, I would guess. Who gets the third most? Steve and Nancy. So we have to look at who's the most important and make sure that we're always coming back to that without spending too long away from it. I would say in a movie, not more than like 2 scenes usually, and in a show maybe 3 scenes. We should generally be coming back to your A story with something that, you know, connects us back to it. And that's like, I think that's just a basic rule, but that if you just keep that in mind and you don't make sure you don't have too many plots going on, because if you're going past C into D and E and F stories and things like that in a pilot,
because Twin Peaks. Yeah, Twin Peaks did that with their show. Like when I was watching, like mainly season 2, Twin Peaks had so many like subplots that I couldn't keep track of all of them, and I was so confused of what was going on.
Yeah,
and it was kind of part of the reason I got bored with the second season.
Right.
But there's just too many things going on at once.
Yeah.
Overwhelming it was.
Right. So I think that if you've balanced everything properly, you're gonna have like a main thing, an A, you're going to have a B, you're going to have a C, and then maybe one more thing that's going to be very small and not going to take up that much space. So A, B, and C is kind of like the standard story arrangement of plots. And then within that, decide which, you know, the A is the most important, B is the second most, and C is the tertiary. We give the A the most pages, the B the second most, the C the third most pages, and make sure we don't get too far from your A. I think if you do all those things, then it's all going to work out in the wash and come together.
Thank you. That was like awesome. Is very helpful, especially because I'm trying to write a TV pilot, and it's like I have everything, but it's like kind of trying to figure out how I want it to go. So I'm just trying to like figure it out by like writing a sort of outline, if that makes sense. Kind of split things up, plan it.
Yeah, this is what we do in all our boot camps.
But my question is, though, it's a short one. So, I don't know if many people do this, but I came up with this thing I call it semi-planning. It's where I write down the general ideas and beats of the story, but it's not extremely detailed. So it's like very vague, and it like helps me to understand the setting and where the characters are. And then after that, when I actually am writing the script, I add more details and I actually like put things in. Because some outlines that I saw, like there was an outline, for example, that literally said interior, blah, 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 and actually like had everything. Whereas with me, I'm just saying for example, I just say we're in a studio and we see people laughing and talking with the talk show host, and that's it. You know, right. Or like we're in an interview. I'm very vague like that. You know?
Can you guys still hear me? I think my webcam came slightly unplugged and
I can hear you.
I can hear you. You're just frozen.
It's frozen, yeah.
It's just a freeze frame.
Can I fix it? Probably not without restarting the stream. Okay, well, I will just be invisible for the rest of this then. Okay. What was the question? Or what were you just talking about? The outline. So, yeah, we do different versions of this. We do in just the kind of like ScriptCamp method. We start with a sketchbook. which is just a bunch of unsorted ideas. Then we move to story beats outline, which is kind of what it sounds like you're talking about, where it's just essentially a list of most of the scenes, and basically what happens in them in a sentence or two. And then from there, we expand that further into scene cards, which are going to be a full paragraph at least for every single scene. So we have a video in the chat if you want to read more about that.
My question is, I wonder, like, do some people just not do the scene cards? Because for me, I don't really want to do that. For me, I would just like do the basic story beats and organizing all from start to finish, and then after that, I would just like go into actually writing the script because it helps me better understand what's going on, and I usually like to write things on the go. So it's like I have like a sort of idea as to how I want it to go from start to finish, and then once I have that idea, it really like helps me actually write the script because I don't like over planning things.
And you finished a lot of scripts like this, and they've turned out well?
No, but it really helps me in the long. But it really helps me, in my opinion.
How do you know it helps you if you haven't finished scripts using it?
It feels comfortable, if that makes sense.
But you haven't finished scripts using the method. So that's
not really.
You can do what you want. I mean, you can use whatever method you'd like. But my question would just be, is it getting you to the end of scripts that are turning out well? And that's the only question we have to ask.
Well.
Go ahead.
The only thing is that like, I'm still trying to write the story, and there's a lot of other things that have been going on, so it's kind of hard to really focus on screenwriting because I have like a lot of other things I have.
Sure.
So it's why things are slow. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I understand. So you can use whatever methods you want. Like, we'll never say that you have to use this, but I think that taking that step to fully plotting everything out, I know it's tough and it's not fun. It's like it's a huge pain. It's hard work, but it does help people finish scripts, and it's a great way to just kind of keep on track and to separate this process of figuring out what happens on the page completely differently from executing it on the page. If we figure it out first, then we don't have to be in the middle of a scene wondering what's going to happen next. So that's all just my method stuff. Like, you can take from that what you want, but yeah, my suggestion would be try just going from story beats to full scene card outline and see if it helps, see if it works for you. Whatever method you're using, if it gets you finished scripts, then there's not a problem with it necessarily. But if it's not getting you finished scripts, maybe there is a problem.
Maybe, yeah. I think it probably will get me finished scripts, because before what I would do is I wouldn't even do that. I would just like have like beginning and end, and I would write the stuff in between, and that is what wouldn't get me finished scripts, in my opinion, because I would struggle as to what I would want for the story, and I would like stop at, let's say, page 20 and be like, where the hell do I continue from here? Yeah. And so, but now when I write down everything and how I want each story plot to go, like the subplots, and I have the beginning, then I would have middle and then more, and then it would help me a lot. So
yeah, so just things to try out. There's lots of different techniques, but I find planning more is usually going to help you finish. So yeah, try it out. Let me scroll up in the chat and just make sure I can get to all the questions that I haven't gotten to yet. Air Nomadic asks, would Sense8 be a good example of a lot of subplots or no? I have heard yes. I haven't watched Sense8, but from what I understand, there's a ton of characters. I think isn't it 8 main characters in it, and they're quite separated for a lot of it, so I'm thinking that would be a very good example, yeah. Game of Thrones, Roman mentions. Yeah, Game of Thrones is like 1 million subplots. Let me see. What else do we have to get to in the chat? I saw a question a moment ago. Oh, Alpha mentions the movie New Year's Day. Yeah, I think that's a similar structure to the Love Actually thing, where it's like, this is just a theme for a bunch of short stories. May
I bring one up?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
A B plot that I love. I mean, I guess you could consider it part of like just the main character's journey, but this movie has a lot of tiny little plots, usually just a point A and a point B, where it's like one thing contrasts another thing, one thing pays off another thing. Everything in this movie seems to be very cyclical. Big Trouble in Little China.
I love.
In particular, the story of Jack, who even though, like, yeah, he's kind of cast as the schmuck, not really knowing what's going on, he's undeniably skilled at certain things. Like, he has the people skills to be able to fake multiple characters. He's rather agile for a guy his size.
Mhm.
He's somewhat good at picking up weapons and learning them quickly. But every single time he tries to be the big macho action hero, he falls flat on his face.
Mhm.
Except
so good.
the very last encounter,
Mhm.
in which he gets his one action hero moment with the very first thing we saw he was skilled at. It's all in the reflexes.
Right. Yes, great
Fucking
example.
love
I also have a favorite like show where it's like you have this sort of my favorite show is The Haunting of Hill House, and it's like a horror series on Netflix.
Mhm.
It's like an anthology series, but with the first season, you have this character named Steven, and he's a complete asshole. Like, he's an arrogant writer who capitalized on his family's misfortune on the incident of Hill House, as a writer. And so he's like a dick like that. But over the course of the show, you see him start to, I wouldn't say warm up to his family, but you slowly start to, because at first he believed that Hill House and everything that happened was something that he made up, and that his mother was crazy,
Mhm.
and that his father was crazy. But towards the rest of the show, he slowly starts to realize that Hill House was real, and that everything that happened was like not something that was insane or messed up, and especially after the crux where his sister died or killed herself. And so over the course of the season, you slowly start to see him coming from someone who is like not superstitious and is a complete asshole to someone who is more, I wouldn't say compassionate, but someone who cares a lot more than before, and basically starts to really warm up, because there was one plot point where his wife, and he was afraid of having kids because he was scared that he would pass down, in his own words, the disease, to where mental illness, because his mother was insane, his father was insane, he thought. So he was worried, and his family was horrible and dysfunctional, so he was worried he would pass that down. But later on, it's like, no, it's not like that. And so you get this ending to where everyone's happy, and he learns that everything is going to be good, and that you just have to take risks, and jump the gun. So you see him, basically what I'm trying to say is you see him go from an asshole writer to a person who's more caring and willing to accept things.
Great.
And that's my favorite kind of character arc.
Thanks for breaking that down. Yeah, the Haunting of Hill House is a rare horror ensemble type story. There's not a lot of this, but Mike Flanagan's sort of whole style of horror drama is one in which there are usually a bunch of different characters, and it feels more like an ensemble drama, almost like something like This Is Us, that just happens to have a horror theme to it.
Yeah, but they're
cool.
also, but the thing is, they're extremely connected, though. It feels, or at least that's how I felt. Like each episode focuses on a new character of the family, but they're all connected. Especially to Hill House, which is something I love in writing.
Sure. Thank you for that. Go ahead, Tamara. Do you have a question or comment?
Oh no, I was just I can't get this damn thing to work. Yeah, I was just going to say, I was going to piggyback onto the question that Nacho put in the comment section about resolving your subplot, because I oftentimes in writing, I have this great subplot going with my other character, but with my secondary character, I should say, but I don't know how to tie it up if it doesn't merge into the main storyline. I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly, but I wanted you to talk more about how, if it's not adding to the subplot completely, how do you, I don't know, what do we use to sum that up?
Is this a show or a movie?
It's a show.
A show. Okay, so it should be clear by the end of the subplot as you resolve it. You're saying it doesn't tie into the A story, but it should still be clear why we watched it and how it's contributing to like what we're watching moving forward. And I guess like if you're gonna have it not touch on your main character and the A story at all, then it should, like, we shouldn't be, I guess this is maybe not a great way of explaining it, but by the end of it, the audience should not be left scratching their heads as to like, well, why was that in the show? And so maybe if you can,
Right.
it may not connect to the main character directly, but it should still be, you should clarify in those last couple scenes how it's going to affect things moving forward. And it's less about, in TV especially, I mean, in certain types of TV, like imagine your sitcom, we want to resolve a subplot. We want to say it's definitively done. The subplot is going to be something like, oh, your main characters, they have a conflict at work for the A story, and their kid is having a fight on the playground as the B story or whatever. And by the end, we want to have the bully come up and apologize, and they work out the problem with the bully, and it's settled. If it's more like a premise-based show where things are going to be happening, it's like a long movie where there's going to be events that unfold week after week after week, then we have to know why it mattered. And it doesn't mean you have to resolve it entirely. Like you could end that bully. Imagine if we ended that bullying subplot in a longer narrative show that wasn't just a sitcom where we wrap everything up by the end. Maybe at the end of it, the bully doesn't end up apologizing and in fact goes home and starts a club of other bullies. And by the end of it, he's like, all right, and tomorrow we're going to all gang up and get revenge. Ha ha ha. Then it's like, okay, we didn't really resolve it, but we made it clear why that's going to matter going forward, because it's going to continue to complicate our characters' lives in this interesting way. So I think that's the thing you should look at the most. When you're resolving subplots in a pilot, think, how is this going to continue to affect the narrative moving forward? What problems is this going to continue to bring up? And what conflicts will this only exacerbate as the story moves forward?
Got you. How does it continue to bring a problem? What was the first thing? What would you say before? How does it continue to create more problems? You said something right before that.
I don't know. Sorry. That's the crux of it, though.
Oh.
How is it going to continue to create problems? How is it going to continue to matter? Like, how is it going to lead to conflict down the line? That's if you have the show that has a lot of story to get through. If it's just a thing of the week story, you do want to resolve it, and we do want to say that's over.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you so much for that. Very thorough.
Sure. Great question as well. Leo says, my favorite movie subplot is, will Peter Parker get laid? Is that in all the movies? Or is that just in I guess that is at least a part of all of them, isn't it? Is there a particular Spider-Man movie or comic or story that you're thinking of, Leo? I don't think he ever has been. That's not true. He's with Mary Jane for a bit in the original trilogy. They're like together for a while, aren't they? I could be crazy. But yeah, the sort of romance storylines are great for showing that other side of your main character, showing them in a different context. And also, usually in action adventure stories, it's a situation where they're out of their element, right? So we're forced to see, how can he either balance a relation, like a human romantic relationship, with the things that he has, the difficulties of his quote job that he does all the time. That's a really nice spot that we often, almost always in superhero stories, that's going to be the role of this B story. But we also need to see them sort of grow as a person and become the kind of person that could support that relationship in order to kind of beat the A problem too. Sometimes that's how it works. Roman says, I like the subplot of Buzz Lightyear finding himself on his own when he finally jumps to fly, as the song I Will Go Sailing No More plays, and the second Buzz in Toy Story 2. Is this in the first one you're talking about, I think, then, in that case? Yeah, Toy Story has a lot of good subplots throughout. The third movie has a really developed villain subplot, which I was actually I did not even see coming. I think villain subplots are going to be if you're wondering which subplots should I include or not include, the villain is going to be one of the best choices to make. And I wanted to include stuff on The Quick and the Dead, which I didn't end up. I had to scrap that part of the presentation because I didn't have time to write it today. But I loved how the villain was developed in Quick and the Dead, and it almost alternates between scene with A story, main character, then scene with villain, scene with A story, scene with villain, scene with A story, and they both bounce off the ensemble, and each of their scenes is with a different member of the ensemble, and it builds out in a really nice way. I loved it. Brilliant script. Okay.
I did have a comment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I've been watching a bunch of anime lately, and I've noticed that.
Just kidding.
Why? Why would you do that?
Why would you do that? I'm not an anime person, but lots of people love it, so don't listen to me. Go ahead.
There's tons of flashbacks in anime,
Yep.
all the time. But I think that one of the slides did bring up, I guess, how that works, or at least subtext, like subconsciously. Because I was like wondering as I was watching this, I was like, how does this work so well? Like they're bringing up these flashbacks to stuff that like where did this come from? You know. But then it's like, you showed the tips for balancing subplots slide, where it's like, start with the conflict directly related to your A story, then end it, or end it connecting to your A story, and a lot of times it ends connecting back to the A story somehow. Like, I guess changing our view on the stakes for certain characters and things.
Yeah, so different worldwide traditions will have very different approaches to how they do a lot of this. And for instance, you mentioned the flashback structure just being much more common in anime. This is one of my things that I don't like that much about it. But yeah, they will be having a fight or whatever, then they'll just go in the middle of the fight. They'll start monologuing and they'll go into some long flashback. And then, but they'll usually come back to the fight before, the end of the episode, hopefully. And yeah, there's lots of interesting other worldwide traditions on how to do this. So definitely good to look at that and take stuff from that works and that you like, and mix it with the things that work well, in our market, in our target audience, and things like that. Thank you for the comment, Paul. People in the comments chat are just now talking about why don't I like anime. Here's a question from C. Sobi. Why is the villain subplot the best? Are we talking about Herod from The Quick and the Dead? I can tell you why that subplot is the favorite if you'd like. So the themes of The Quick and the Dead, which is a Western from 1995 directed by Sam Raimi starring Sharon Stone, the villain being Gene Hackman's character, whose name is John Herod. The movie's basically all about killing people. Or this idea of killing, and when is it right, when is it wrong, who has the right to do it, who doesn't have the right to do it. And the way that the villain develops, we come to really clearly see why he has these philosophies on death that he does. He invites the main character to dinner, and in this brilliant scene, he tells her about, hey, when I was a kid, my dad put one bullet in a gun and went around to each of my family members and pulled the trigger at each of our heads, and then he put it to his own head and bang, shot himself, killed himself. And that's how I learned how the world works, basically. Like, if someone dies, they deserved to die. And that philosophy that Herod kind of was exposed to early on in his life is what leads to almost all the conflict in the movie. Everything from his relationship with Court to the way that he runs the town. And I think that the time and the development they gave him shows us, not only really fleshes out who he is, but it clarifies why, and it makes him sympathetic in its own weird way. Because he's so messed up. But we see, like, with such clarity what made him that way. And I just love that. And that's almost always going to work well in a script. Almost never, except in some stories, like in slasher movies, for instance, maybe it can work well to not learn that much about the villain or why they're doing what they're doing. But in most stories, learning exactly where the villain is coming from and why they're passionate about opposing your hero is going to make your hero's journey feel stronger, because they're going to have to overcome somebody who's really thought through all their points and who is coming from some philosophy that has a really concrete grounding in something. And your hero is thus going to be forced to realize what they themselves are made of and what they believe just as strongly. Okay, so hopefully that answers that question. We're down to our last 5 minutes. Let me just say, feel free to unmute and ask whatever questions you'd like. On the mic or in the text. Is my camera back? No, I'm still frozen. Look at my face. I look so bored. Go ahead.
What would be a good way to do a villain subplot, but also have it be comedic?
Oh. Is the whole movie comedic?
Well, yes. It's sort of, the idea that I'm doing is sort of a parody / satire on comics, and the main hero is a very generic superhero who comes out of his comic and lands in the real world.
Okay.
And then learns what friendship is, and learns to balance his life and heroism. Mm-hmm. And partway through, the villain comes out of the comic as well, and there's going to be a villain subplot. but it has a lot of comedy in it as well. So I don't know if you have any advice or examples of anything you can think of.
Well, you're doing sort of a Jumanji. Have you seen Jumanji?
Yes,
So the villain in that is kind of funny, but still very sinister.
that's true. That is actually a pretty decent example. You're right, because I think with that one, yeah, he is just like a relentless sort of villain going after you, but like he gets into a lot of hijinks because of like he's very much like out of this world. Yeah, no, that's actually a very good example. I didn't. Yeah,
He's from the same world, like he comes from the fantasy world as well, so he sort of represents all the danger of that world, exemplified in one person, so the big game hunter. And he's very over the top and cartoonish at the same time. And so you probably want to do something similar with your character, where he still is sinister. Like, we shouldn't lose the fact that he's dangerous with the comedy. That's my main tip for you, is that the moment that we stop believing that your villain is a threat is the moment that you'll lose a lot of the audience.
Exactly. That was my fear too, because I want to have him have some like funny moments and stuff, and like I think the juxtaposition though is like a lot of it is basically the same reasons why it's funny for the hero is the same reason it should be funny for the villain, in the way that they're so much the archetype of their comic version that like when they're in the real world, it's just gonna be a clash with the real world.
Yeah, so think of all the ways that he's a fish out of water, and how his expectations of how the Last Action Hero is another example of this exact sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I love Last Action Hero. It's absolutely brilliant. And is the best scene the one where the movie villain comes into the real world? He needs to steal a car, so he goes to a mechanic shop and he just shoots the clerk. And then he's like, oh god, the cops are coming now. And then nobody's coming. And he's like, wait, I've just shot this man. Does no one care? And he looks around and somebody leans out the window and is just like, shut up, it's 3 a.m. or whatever. And he's like, oh, that's the difference between his expectation based on the world he comes from and the reality that he's been thrust into is what makes him still humorous and still a fish out of water while not losing at all the fact that he just shot a guy, right? So that's how another example of how you can balance it. You're going to want to look at the same things that would make a fish out of water hero funny are the same things that you can use to make your fish out of water villain funny.
Yeah, and that makes sense because crime also is a thing in mind, obviously with superheroes, and like how with the hero, like he'll see like a someone pickpocket or like someone like in a store doing like a petty crime of like just stealing like some like candy bar or something, like some kid doing it, and as a hero he takes crime very seriously, so he sees that as like as much of a threat as anything else. And then so like with the villain, like like he does crime is just different, like because for him like it's like taking over the world and like
stealing the Statue of Liberty or whatever.
Is actually, and crime is actually like pretty mundane. Like someone will just draw a weapon on you and like pickpocket you or like
Yeah, I get you. I'm with you. So yeah, his expectations of what crime should be like are going to be very funny.
Yeah, like he's thinking like people have like you should be aspiring to do more than just a petty crime.
Imagine, a scene where he goes into a dark alley and finds a couple muggers and he's like, you guys want a job? We're going to steal the Eiffel Tower. And they're like, what? Like
exactly, that kind of thing,
Yeah, I could see a lot of comedic situations coming from that clash of expectations
you also
and
have
reality.
Villains in comedy like Gru from Despicable Me, whose whole goal is to steal the moon, So I think it's you can get a lot of like ridiculous, like it's a villainous thing to do, but like it's so absurd, but like it would be incredibly villainous if he actually pulled it off, but like it's so absurd that like would anyone ever actually be able to do it in a comic? Yes, you probably could, because you have the unlimited resources as like just blank scientists with knowledge of everything. But it
only makes sense in his world.
Exactly, it's that juxtaposition, and it also would frame the villain, the hero pretty well, so it would be a good plot to do. So
great questions, great comments, and I see a couple more in the chat that I wasn't able to get to, so feel free to post these in our many chat channels that we have. I'd love to answer some of these soon. We're at the end of our time. We have a question in the chat: what hours and days would our class be offered? So look at the screen right now. We have that new session of Feature Bootcamp that starts Friday, February 17th. That's the day after tomorrow. 6 p.m. on Fridays for the next 8 weeks. We have TV Pilot starting March 5th, Sundays 11 to 1, and that is going to be writing a whole pilot in 6 weeks. If you'd like to write a book, new novel class starts on the 25th at 12 to 2 on Saturdays. That is all we have time for today. Sorry for the questions I was not able to get to at the end. We're already over our time. There were some good ones in here. So thank you all so much for coming and for participating, except for those trolls at the beginning. That was not nice. Don't do that. Don't troll me. I'm doing a free class. But I'm sure they went back to their troll kingdom. All right, so we're going to wrap up here. We'd love to see you guys soon for, again, any of these free upcoming classes. These are all open to everybody. And if you'd like to continue in any of the boot camps past that first week, make sure to sign up for Unlimited on our website. You can just go to scriptcamp.net and you can click on membership and scroll down here for a 2-week free trial of absolutely everything that we do. So you can come to every boot camp, every workshop, every lab, over 100 hours of stuff every month. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great rest of your night. We hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Connor.
Thanks.